praying about something in my life and trying to make it happen. So I'm sure when I read this little excerpt that to redirect my thinking, I thought maybe some of you are doing the same thing in your life. So I wanted to just add this in. It's from the book, The Gathering, a 40-day guide to the power of group and personal prayer by Jim Rosemergy, also the former executive vice president of Unity School. But in this one excerpt here, he says, waiting humbles us. We discover how powerless we are to make changes within ourselves. We try, expend effort, and strive with noble intentions, but we fail to realize the transformation is divine work. The waiting humbles us and opens us up to powers and methods we do not understand. Eventually, our efforts cease. This happens when divine efforts are best felt and experienced. We let go and let God be God. So whatever you're praying for, as Marty said in his meditation, it's the work of the divine. We let God be God in us. So that's that. I've entitled our message today, Belonging as Blessing. A sense of belonging as blessing. My mom was the black sheep of her family. She was the 7th of 11 children. She was raised on a farm in a very remote area in Nebraska. She never fit in there. When she finished high school, as soon as she could, she left that town for Chicago, the big city. And there she found heaven and her tribe. Now, you may not belong to your original family. You may match them genetically, but temperamentally, you may belong to an entirely different group, right? So today I want to invite all of us to spend less time on what they didn't give to us, on what they are not capable of giving to us, and spend more time on finding our authentic selves, empowering more profoundly our authentic selves, and finding the people we belong to. I'm sure that's why we're all here, because we belong to each other. We're the family of God and the family of Christ. Now, it's not that we only want to associate with people who are like us, right? The theme of our year is the power of collective consciousness, but it's an important and great necessity that we understand who we are so that we can contribute our beauty and our love and our gifts and our talents to the collective whole. Hans Christian Andersen wrote dozens of stories about the orphan archetype, He was a premier advocate of the lost child and strongly supported searching for and finding your own kind. And I think, again, because we're all here in Unity, we've made that journey, haven't we? We've been the odd one out from our families in terms of, you believe what? Kind of thing. Hans Christian Andersen's story, The Ugly Duckling, was first published in 1845 about the archetype of the unusual and the dispossessed. And it's what's called a psychological root story, in that it contains a truth that is fundamental to human development, that sense of belonging. I was at one of Ruben's lectures yesterday on longevity, and he was talking about there are 5 things that contribute to longevity, and one of those is relationships. Being surrounded by loving relationships, being in community in loving relationships. And in fact, of the 5 factors that affect longevity, it's number 1, a sense of belonging. I want to spend some time this morning reading to you the Ugly Duckling story. You'll remember at Halloween we shared Skeleton Woman from Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And I want to share just this synopsis of her story of the Ugly Duckling here so that we get the story, and then we'll talk about its impact. So settle in, go back to 3rd grade when you're 8 years old and your teacher's reading to you, and her writing is so poetic and wonderful, you'll be able to feel it. I'm going to put this on here, though, even though. It was near the time of harvest. The old women were making green dolls from corn sheaves, and the old men were mending the blankets. The girls were embroidering their white dresses with blood-red flowers, and the boys were singing as they pitched golden hay. And down by the river there was a mother duck brooding on her nest of eggs. Everything was going as it should for this mother duck, and finally, one by one, her eggs began to tremble and shake until the shells cracked and out staggered all her new ducklings. But there was one egg left, a very big egg, and it just sat there like a stone. An old duck came by and tried to dissuade the duck mother from sitting on her egg any longer. "It's a turkey egg," she exclaimed. Not a proper kind of egg at all. Can't get a turkey into the water, you know." She knew because she had tried. But for the duck mother, she felt that she'd been sitting for such a long time that a little longer would not hurt. And eventually the big egg began to shudder and roll, and it finally broke open, and out tumbled a big, ungainly creature. His skin was etched with curly red and blue veins, his feet were pale purple, and his eyes transparent pink. The duck mother cocked her head and stretched her neck and peered at him. She couldn't help herself. She pronounced him ugly. Maybe it is a turkey after all, she worried. But when the ugly duckling took to the water with the other offspring, the duck mother saw that he swam straight and true. Yes, he's one of my own, even though he's a very peculiar one. But actually, in the right light, he's almost handsome. So she presented him to the other creatures in the farmyard, but they harassed him. And the queen duck said, surely he was a mistake. "He's not a mistake," said the duck mother. "He's going to be very strong. He just laid in the egg a little too long and is yet a little misshapen. He'll straighten out, you'll see." But the others did all they could to harass the ugly duckling. They flew at him, bit him, pecked him, hissed and screeched at him, and their torment grew worse as time went on. He hid and dodged, but he could not escape. The duckling was as miserable as any creature could be. At first, his mother defended him, but then even she grew tired of it all and exclaimed in exasperation, "I wish you would just go away." So the ugly duckling ran away. And then he went through a series of ordeals and bad choices and places and mistakes and all kinds of things. And in one part, we're told he came upon a pond and swam there he came upon a pond, and as he swam there, it became colder and colder, and a flock of creatures flew overhead, the most beautiful he had ever seen. They cried down to him, and hearing their sounds made his heart leap and break at the same time. He cried back in a sound he had never before made. He had never seen creatures more beautiful, and he had never felt more bereft. He turned and turned in the water to watch them till they flew out of sight, and then he dove to the bottom of the lake and huddled there, trembling. He was beside himself, for he felt a desperate love for those great white birds, a love he could not understand. A colder wind began to blow harder and harder through the days, and the snows came. And one morning the duckling found himself frozen in the ice, and it was then that he felt he would surely die. But luckily a farmer came by and freed the duckling by breaking the ice with his staff, and he lifted the duckling up and tucked him under his coat and marched home. And when he got there, the farmer's wife thought, this thing doesn't lay eggs, we may as well just cook him and eat him. And the kids chased him, and he escaped through the cat door and found himself out in the cold again. And on a pond nearby, the water became warmer, and the ugly duckling, wait a minute, where am I here? So the duckling flapped through the cat's door, and outside at last he lay in the snow, half dead. And on a pond nearby, the water became warmer, and the ugly duckling who floated there stretched his wings. How strong and big they were! They lifted him high over the land, and from the air he saw the orchards and their white gowns and the farmers plowing. Also paddling on the pond, there were 3 swans, the same beautiful creatures he had seen the autumn before, those that so caused his heart to ache. He felt pulled to join them. What if they act as if they like me, and then as I join them, they fly away laughing, thought the duckling. But he glided down and landed on the pond, his heart beating hard. And as soon as they saw him, the swans began to swim toward him. No doubt I'm about to meet my end, thought the duckling. But if I'm to be killed, then rather by these beautiful creatures than the hunters and the farm wives and the long winters. And he bowed his head to await their blows. But all of a sudden, in the reflection of the water, he saw a swan in full dress, snowy plumage, slow eyes and all. The ugly duckling did not at first recognize himself, for he looked just like the beautiful strangers, just like those he had admired from afar. And it turned out that he was one of them after all. His egg had accidentally rolled into a family of ducks. He was a swan, a glorious swan. And for the first time, his own kind came near him and touched him gently and lovingly with their wingtips. And they groomed him with their beaks and swam round and round him in greeting. And the children who came to feed the swans bits of bread cried out, "Look, there's a new one." And as children everywhere do, they ran to tell everyone. And the old women came down to the water, and the men took time away from their milking, and all celebrated. And one by one, because of life and passion and time passing, they all danced away. The children and the swans all danced away, leaving just us and the springtime and another mother duck down by the river nesting on her eggs. Beautiful, isn't it? Well, the problem of exile is primeval. Many fairy tales and myths center around the theme of the outcast. In such tales, the central figure, like the ugly duckling, struggles and suffers before finding their own way. Raise your hand if you've had that journey. As we look at the story of the ugly duckling, we see a series of various creatures in the village peer at him, and they pronounce him unacceptable. Unacceptable. He is in reality not ugly, he just does not match the others. The animals fly at him and peck at him and chase him away, and he's heartbroken to be rejected by his own, especially since he did nothing to warrant it. He just acted and looked a little bit different. Our culture very narrowly defines what constitutes success or desirable perfection, doesn't it? Looks, height, weight, economics, manliness, womanliness, good behavior, religious belief, skin color, and now country of origin. You know, all the things we put on what's acceptable and what's right and good. And when you are held to a measurement that has nothing to do with who you are, nothing to do with who you are in the core of your being, it does something very interesting. What it does, if you allow it, is it sets you on a magical journey, on a soul journey, to find your real self, to find what your soul requires to be satisfied and fulfilled. Jesus said it this way in Matthew chapter 10, verse 14. If anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet and leave that place. Now, spiritually, metaphysically, feet represent understanding. That's what stands under you and allows you to stand tall in your life. Dust represents any negativity that clings to you. We've all walked that dusty road or the sand on the beach and had it cling to us. And we all know how great it feels when all that negativity or all of that dirt is washed off, right? Likewise, we know who it feels good to be around, what consciousness vibrates in alignment with ours or vibrates higher than ours, that's seeking to pull us up rather than drag us down. The ugly duckling is symbolic of the Christ self within you as your wild nature. Your wild, that exciting, passionate, adventurous nature. The wild nature, when it's pressed into circumstances of little nurture or exile, it instinctively strives to continue no matter what. When it's pressed into something it is not, when your wild nature is, if somebody tries to conform you to something that you're not or you could never be, it instinctively holds on and holds out. It takes great strength to do that. And we often do it sometimes with style and sometimes with very little grace, right? Endurance is one of the greatest strengths that exile brings. It will sustain you through horrendous experiences until you come into your own. Now, Scripture gives us a couple of inspiring and affirming references that help us remember that God will never forsake us. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6. Listen to these beautiful words. If you're in that transition time and you're venturing out into something new and you're unsure and uncertain and everybody around you is telling you that won't work, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. I never knew it said that. Because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. And oftentimes the them in the Scripture is all your thought people. Remember, all the people that are ruminating in your thoughts. It's not really anybody out here so much as it's your thought people in here saying, oh, I can't do that. Joshua chapter 1, verse 5, no one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. So with that instinctive word living inside of us, and we go forward onto that soul journey to find what our soul requires. We see the ugly duckling go from place to place, trying to find where he belongs. And first at birth, he finds himself where he can act the part. You know, he doesn't really fit in, for instance, but he can swim well, but he doesn't look right. So he's trying to act like a duck, but he isn't a duck, right? Don't we have that saying? If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it is a duck. For all of us, for each of us, it's imperative that we not strive too hard or believe too deeply that if we act just right, we'll fit in. How many of you have tried that? See, I'm preaching to the choir here. It's a kind of acting or a wish to belong at all costs that stifles your soul. You don't fit. You know you don't fit. So why try? I mean, you kind of have to make the best of the situation, but until you can move yourself to a place, that's a lot of prayer work. That's that waiting, rather than trying to make things happen that we talked about. It's this kind of acting and wish to belong at all costs that stifles your soul. So instead of being a vitally alive, passionate self, you become a well-behaved, well-meaning, restrained self. It's far more soulful to search. It's far more soulful to search. There's a phenomenon that happens when you keep trying to fit in and fail. And what happens is you're driven out, but at the same time you're driven to what's the next right thing for you. We see in the ugly duckling's path that each time he has an ordeal, he's catapulted on to something else that meddles his soul, that gives him all that he needs for his eternal ongoing. And so when you're cast out, fired from a job, divorced in a marriage, or lose your fortune, or whatever it is, your soul is being meddled for what's right for you. And it's worse to stay someplace that you don't belong than to step into the unknown and let yourself find your new way. It's never a mistake to search for what you require for your soul. Never. Never. Secondly, we see the ugly duckling becomes frozen in the ice pond. And this is symbolic of one of the ways we deal with exile is to numb out. If you don't fit, sometimes it's just as good to stick your head in the sand and deny or pretend that the situation doesn't exist. We numb out. For a human to be frozen means to purposely shut down our feelings, especially toward ourselves. To just numb out and go through the motions day after day after day. Sometimes that is a survival mechanism. Sometimes that is a self-protective mechanism. But the soul doesn't respond to iciness. The soul responds to warmth. And so the ice has to be broken, and the soul has to be taken out of the freeze. And we see in the story the farmer comes along and breaks the ice and takes the duckling out. In myth and story, Spirit always comes, always sends someone in the form of divine help. And that person pulls us out, feeds us, shows us the secret passageway, shows us the hidden place, gives us the awakening kiss, right? It always, 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 Spirit comes as divine help. And the one who takes us out of the ice, the one who frees us to feel again, is not necessarily the one that we belong to. So do me a favor, don't marry this person. This is a divine initiate. This is Spirit sending divine help. They're a divine initiate who very often appears out of nowhere to assist us and then disappears out of sight again. And we think, whoa, we've misjudged it. So just allow that divine help to come. Their coming when we are down is solely for the purpose of pushing us through to the next level, to pushing us through to the next level, which is the strength that comes from exile. The remaining ordeals in the story demonstrate there's something useful in struggle. There's something useful in everything, but there's something useful in struggle, something that the duckling is being tempered for, being made strong for. His wings are developing. He's growing. He's strengthening mentally, emotionally, and physically. Exile takes out weakness. It removes whininess. It enables acute insight into things that the insider could never have. The duckling was led through a series of ordeals where he felt frozen, lonely, cold, harassed, chased, shot at, given up on, at the edge of death, and not knowing what would come next. And then in the story, spring comes. Spring always comes. The promise of your Christ Spirit, the promise of that wild nature in you that will seek, that will adventure out, that has the courage to take the risk. The promise of that wild nature is that it will endure through the harshest of winters and carry you through to spring every time. No exceptions. Spring will come. And the ugly duckling then finally sees his true identity in his own reflection. He sees himself as he really is, beautiful, perfect, stellar, strong. And when your soul then also is surrounded by psychic acknowledgement and acceptance, you feel life and power as never before. When you find your tribe, when you find your community, when you find your divine family, your spiritual family. So the final work of exile is recognizing your own true identity, acceptance of your unique beauty, and acceptance of your individuality. And learning then to contribute your unique beauty to the greater whole, to beyond the pond with the swans, contributing to the joy that they bring to the children and the people nearby. In the ugly duckling story, his heart stirred every time he saw the swans lift up in the sky. Your most authentic self, your Christ self within you, is ever waiting your recognition. Now, most of us are here because we've recognized that. So our role now is to allow ourselves to make recognition of it or enter into it more profoundly and more fully as we live longer and longer and allow that surrender into that truth of who we are. You are created in the image and likeness of God. You not only match, but you belong to the divine. Isn't that a wonderful vision of what's for your life? And what you match to is the family of God. Where your true home is the kingdom of heaven, right here on earth. So, don't cringe or make yourself small if you're called the black sheep or the maverick or the lone wolf. If you've ever been called unique, interesting, defiant, incorrigible, forward, bold, unruly, a handful to raise, rebellious, if when you go home to your family, some of them still have abject fear in their heart when you pull into the driveway, your wild nature is alive. It's close by. Those with slow seeing, Clarissa says in her story of the ugly duckling, those with slow seeing say a nonconformist is a blight on society. But it's been proven over the centuries that being different means you are practically guaranteed to make an original contribution. A useful and a stunning contribution. Think about it, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Einstein. And don't listen to the tiny-hearted. Be kind to them, but don't follow their advice, because finding where you belong is a very intimate, very personal journey. It's the journey in which you feel your way down into the deepest truth of who you are. And the guide with the navigator within you is your Christ spirit. And the compass is your heart. Your heart. Walt Whitman summed it up pretty well. He said, I am larger and better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness in me. Isn't that beautiful? So God bless you all, my little black sheep. Let's close this. Let's close this in a moment of prayer. Let's affirm it and seal it. In loving presence, we know the truth. And let my voice be your voice. The truth that I am seeking abides in me already. I am self-complete in God, beautiful and divine. The very image of the Christ Spirit is implanted within me, and it's perfect, adequate, enough, just the way I am. This morning I take all the ways that I've believed I'm not enough, that I don't fit in, that I don't belong, the places where I hold myself aloof. Take all those places and I place them on the altar of God, the altar of God's love. And there they're dissolved into nothingness from which they came. And I rest in the realization that I am precious to God. I am precious to God. Let's affirm that. I am precious to God. I have value and worth. Together, I have value and worth. I am enough. Together, I am enough. I am love. I am a unique and beautiful expression of the divine. I am the Christ of God, and I accept my divine inheritance. I belong to the kingdom. I belong to the family of God. And we let this realization flower in our hearts. Each one of you here is blessed with a unique beauty and an individuality of the Christ Spirit. And it shines forth from you, guides you, protects you, and leads you. And for this we are grateful. Thank you, God. Amen.